What if the greatest savior in Egyptian mythology had a shadow? Not a metaphorical darkness, a Jungian archetype to be pondered by scholars, but a literal twin brother, born of the same impossible magic, a being so dangerous to the established order that his name, his image, and his very existence was scrubbed from the annals of history. You have been told a story, a clean, heroic narrative. You know of Isis, the powerful goddess whose love defied death. You know of Osiris, the benevolent king, murdered and dismembered by his jealous brother, Set. And you know of Horus, the divine falcon, the child of prophecy, conceived in a flash of impossible magic, destined to avenge his father and restore order to a world plunged into chaos. This is the official story. The one carved into the sunlit temple walls, the one repeated by priests for millennia, the one that forms the bedrock of our understanding of Egyptian cosmology. It is a story of light versus darkness, good versus evil, order versus chaos. And it is a lie. Not a complete lie, but a profound and deliberate simplification, a story with its most crucial chapter ripped out, its most challenging character erased. Because the magic that brought Horus into being was not clean. It was not a simple miracle. It was an act that violated the fundamental laws of reality, performed under duress with a fragmented divine blueprint. And an act of such cosmic desperation does not produce a simple outcome. It creates a schism. It splits reality. The truth, hidden in the gaps of the hieroglyphs, whispered in the fragmented and forbidden texts of the Gnostics, is that from the womb of Isis came not one child, but two. Horus, the Falcon of Light, was born, yes. But with him, in the same breath, came his shadow. A twin, an equal and opposite force, a being who embodied not the sky but the void, not the sun but the silence before creation. His name has been lost, chiseled from stone and cursed from memory, but we shall call him Anshe, the unnamed, the shadow of Horus. He did not just threaten the throne of Egypt, he threatened the entire cosmic order of Ra. He was not a villain. He was a philosophical rebellion, a living question that the gods themselves could not answer, and so they chose to silence him instead. This is not the story of a hero. This is the story of a being who had to confront and integrate his own forgotten darkness to become whole. And it reveals a truth about your own nature, your own shadow, and the power that is unlocked when you finally stop fighting the other half of your soul. To understand the birth of the shadow, you must first understand the nature of the conception. It was not an act of love in the human sense. It was an act of cosmic defiance. When Isis reassembled the 14 scattered pieces of Osiris, she was not just putting a body back together. She was attempting to reboot a divine operating system from fragmented code. Osiris, the principle of order, was dead. His consciousness was no longer anchored to the physical plane. He existed in the duat, the twilight realm between life and non-existence. Isis's ritual was an act of supreme magical will. She used her own life force, the pure generative power of the divine feminine, to create a temporary bridge across dimensions. She hovered over his lifeless form as a kite, a bird of prey, and breathed a flicker of her own spirit into him. But she was breathing life into a vessel that was saturated with the energy of death. She was mingling the frequency of creation with the frequency of the void. It was an unbalanced equation, a sacred and dangerous alchemy performed not in a controlled temple, but in the chaos of grief and necessity. The result of such a union could never be singular. It was an act of quantum entanglement, creating not one soul, but a bifurcated one. Two potentials emerging from a single event. From this paradoxical union, a schism in reality occurred. Isis brought forth a child, but the child was dual. Horus was born into the light. He was the golden falcon, the embodiment of the sky, the sun, the principle of divine order made manifest. He was his father's vengeance and his mother's hope, aligned with the solar, structured reality of Ra. He was the heir, the hero, the one the world was waiting for, but he was not alone. Born with him, tethered to him, was his opposite, Anshi, the shadow twin. If Horus was the sky, Anshi was the abyss. He was born of the silence in Osiris's tomb, the memory of the duat, the chaotic and infinite potential of the void that existed before Ra ever spoke the first word of creation. He was not a creature of light, but of the deep, velvety darkness between the stars. He was not evil, but he was antithetical to the established order. Isis, a master of cosmic law, knew immediately what had happened. She had not created a monster, but she had given form to a cosmic paradox. She had birthed both the savior and the question that could undo him. A world built on the singular supremacy of light could not comprehend, let alone accept, a being like Anshi. He would be seen as an abomination, a flaw in creation. So she made a choice, born of both love and fear. She presented Horus to the world, to the assembly of the gods, as her sole, miraculous son. He was raised in the sunlit temples, trained in the arts of kingship and warfare, tutored by Thoth himself in the laws of Ma'at. He was groomed to be a weapon of light, a force of order to reclaim the world from the chaos of Set. Meanwhile, Anshi was hidden. He was not abandoned, but he was exiled to the places that light does not touch. He was raised in the liminal spaces, in the hidden groves of the Nile Delta, in the twilight passages that lead to the Duat. His tutors were not the gods of the pantheon, but the ancient, formless spirits of the underworld. He did not learn the laws of Ra. He learned the magic of the void, the power of silence, the wisdom that comes from darkness and formlessness. While Horus learned to command, Anshi learned to dissolve. While Horus learned to build, Anshi learned to unmake. He grew not in anger or jealousy, but in a profound, quiet understanding of his own nature. He saw himself not as a mistake, but as the necessary counterweight to his brother's brilliance. He understood that light without shadow casts no shape. That order, without the memory of chaos, becomes a prison. He was the other half of the divine equation, the one that had been deliberately ignored. And he knew, with a certainty that mirrored his brother's own sense of destiny, that a day would come when the two halves of this singular soul would have to meet. And that meeting would not be a reunion. It would be a war for the very nature of reality itself. A war to decide if the universe would continue to be a kingdom of light, or if it would be returned to the glorious, infinite, and terrifying potential of the dark. The two brothers grew in their separate worlds, one in the blinding sun of divine favor, the other in the deep, knowing quiet of the shadows. Horus became a warrior of formidable power, his will as sharp and bright as a blade of light. And she became a sorcerer of unimaginable depth, his power rooted not in force, but in silence, in the ability to manipulate the very fabric of what is and what is not. They were like the two poles of a cosmic magnet, forever linked, forever separate, and inevitably destined to collide. Their eventual meeting was not an accident. It was an appointment set by the laws of cosmic necessity. It happened not on a battlefield, but in a space between worlds, a dreamlike landscape where thought and form were one. There, they saw each other for the first time since the womb, and in that instant, they recognized not an enemy, but the missing piece of themselves. Yet, that recognition did not bring peace. It brought conflict. Their war was not for the throne of Egypt. That was a human prize, a triviality. Their war was for the philosophy that would govern creation. It was a debate between two irreconcilable truths. Horus, the champion of Ra, argued for the sanctity of order, for the beauty of form, for the righteous path of light and structure. He saw the world as a divine kingdom to be protected, a song to be sung in perfect harmony. To him, chaos was a disease, darkness was an error, and the void was something to be feared and filled. He was the righteous son, fighting to restore the world his father had built, a world of clear distinctions, moral certainties, and unwavering solar light. Enshi, the voice of the void, saw things differently. He looked upon his brother's world not with jealousy, but with a kind of pity. "You fight to restore a cage," he would say, his voice not a sound but a resonance in the mind. "You call it order, but it is limitation. You call it light, but it is a blinding glare that prevents you from seeing the infinite darkness that gives you form." Before Ra, before the first sunbeam, there was everything. A sea of pure potential. Every possibility, every reality, existing at once. Your father's world, Ra's world, is but one single, lonely thought, plucked from that infinity. And you mistake that thought for the whole of the mind. And she did not want to rule the world of men. He wanted to liberate them from the illusion of it. His goal was to dissolve the rigid structures of creation, to unmake the laws of Ra, not out of malice, but to return the cosmos to the state of infinite, formless potential it once held. He saw Ra's cyclical order, the rising and setting sun, the procession of life and death, as a repetitive, meaningless loop, a cosmic tyranny that promised stability but denied true freedom. Why fight to be king of a single, flawed world? And she challenged Horus. When you could become one with the consciousness that dreams all worlds into being and then lets them go. This was the ultimate heresy, a direct challenge to the supremacy of the Creator God. It was a philosophy that the priesthood of Ra could not allow to exist. A war against Set was understandable. That was a battle for control within the existing system. But a war against Horus's shadow twin was a war against the system itself. It was a questioning of the very value of existence. Enshi's power was terrifying to the gods of light because it wasn't aggressive, it was subtractive. He could drain the color from a landscape, silence a song, dissolve a memory. He could touch a solid object and remind it of the emptiness from which its atoms were formed, causing it to lose coherence and drift apart. His magic was the magic of entropy, of stillness, of the great cosmic zero. Their battles were legendary, but they were never recorded. They raged across the astral planes, through the dream time, and in the quiet chambers of Horus's own soul. Horus would attack with spears of sunlight, and Enshi would simply absorb them into his formless shadow. Horus would command the elements, and Enshi would whisper to them of the silence they came from, and they would cease to obey. Horus, the warrior of light, found that he was fighting an enemy he could not strike, a darkness that could not be vanquished because it was not an external entity. It was the negative space around his own light. Every victory he won felt hollow because it was a victory over himself. Every blow he landed on his brother, he felt a corresponding wound in his own spirit. He was fighting his own reflection in a dark mirror. and he was beginning to realize that the reflection was just as real as he was. The gods watched in terror, realizing the cosmic gamble that had unfolded. They had backed the child of light, but they had underestimated the power of the void he was born from, and they began to understand that if Horus failed, it would not just be the end of his claim to the throne. It would be the end of the world as they knew it. The danger posed by Anshi was not a military threat. It was a philosophical contagion. His very existence was a challenge to the foundational principle of the Egyptian cosmos, the absolute supremacy of Ra, the sun god, the source of all light, life, and order. Ra's creation was a closed system, cyclical and predictable. The sun rose, crossed the sky, battled the serpent of chaos Apep in the night, and was reborn at dawn. This cycle was Mayat. It was the law. It was reality. Anshi's philosophy was that this cycle was not reality. It was a cage. He represented the memory of what existed before Ra, the infinite, unmanifested potential of the void. To the gods of Ra's pantheon, this was a truth more terrifying than any army. An army can be defeated, but an idea once planted can unravel a universe. If beings began to believe that the ultimate goal was not to live harmoniously within creation, but to dissolve back into the potential before it, society would collapse. Worship would cease. Temples would crumble. The entire energetic structure that fed and sustained the gods would starve. This is why the campaign to erase him was so absolute, so methodical. It was a form of cosmic censorship enacted at every level of existence. First, the physical evidence was destroyed. Any stele, any papyrus, any temple carving that even hinted at a dual birth was systematically chiseled away, plastered over, or shattered. The priesthood of Ra, under the direct command of Thoth, who in this role acted not as a neutral observer, but as the enforcer of cosmic stability, hunted down and eliminated any cult that may have formed around the shadow child. His name was made a word of power that was forbidden to be spoken, for to speak a name is to give it energy, to keep its frequency alive in the field. They were not just deleting a historical figure, they were attempting to delete a frequency from reality. But physical erasure was not enough. The memory of Anshe existed in the myths, in the oral traditions, and most dangerously, in the soul of his twin. This is where the inconsistencies in the Horus myth become crucial evidence of the cover-up. The official story needed a simple villain, a clear antagonist for the hero to defeat. Set, the chaotic uncle, was the perfect candidate. He was already a figure of disorder. It was easy to graft the deeper, more philosophical threat of Anshe onto Set's character. So the story was rewritten. The complex and terrifying war between the two halves of a divine soul became a simple, digestible family feud. The profound philosophical debate about the nature of existence was reduced to a story about jealousy and inheritance. But the original truth bleeds through in the details. In some texts, Horus is described as Horus the Red, a figure of terrifying, almost uncontrollable rage. During his battles, he is sometimes consumed by a darkness that makes him indistinguishable from Set himself. This isn't a character flaw. It is a moment of bleed-through, a glimpse of Anshi's consciousness surfacing through his brother. Horus isn't just fighting Set. He is fighting the shadow within himself, the twin whose power is forever entangled with his own. The most famous example is the story of the Eye of Horus. In the sanitized myth, Set tears out Horus's eye during a battle. The eye is later magically restored by Thoth, becoming the powerful Wedjut amulet, a symbol of healing, protection, and wholeness. But what if the eye was never lost to Set? What if the tearing out of the eye was a metaphor for the schism within Horus himself? The loss of his eye represents his loss of whole sight, his inability to see the world through the darkness of his brother as well as his own light. He was fighting with only one eye open, the solar eye, and was therefore incomplete and vulnerable. Thoth's role as the healer of the eye was not about magical first aid. It was Thoth, the great initiator, guiding Horus toward the only possible solution. He had to stop fighting his shadow and begin the process of understanding and integrating it. The healing of the eye was not a gift from Thoth. It was the result of Horus finally confronting the truth of his own dual nature. The erased records are not just missing papyri. The erasure is energetic. It's in the way the story was deliberately flattened to remove its most dangerous and empowering truth. That darkness is not an external enemy to be conquered, but an internal force to be embraced. The priesthood of Ra could not allow the masses to understand this. A populace that understood the necessity of integrating their own shadow would be ungovernable. They would not need priests to forgive their sins or kings to tell them what is right. They would find balance within themselves. And that is the one thing a system built on external authority can never allow. The story had to be buried, not because it was false, but because it was true. The climax of this cosmic war could not be a simple victory. Light cannot annihilate darkness any more than a shape can annihilate the space around it. Horus, after countless battles that left him wounded and spiritually exhausted, came to understand this profound truth. Every blow against Anshi was a blow against himself. He could not destroy his twin because they were not two separate beings. They were two poles of a single, entangled existence. To destroy the shadow would be to collapse his own soul into an unbalanced, incomplete state. A victory that would be a form of suicide. The final confrontation was not a battle. It was a surrender. Horus stopped fighting. He lowered his spear of light and stood before his brother, not as a warrior, but as a witness. He finally saw Anshi not as an enemy, but as the reflection of the part of himself he had been taught to fear and deny, the silence, the depth, the unknown, the power of the void. In that moment of radical acceptance, the true healing of the Eye of Horus occurred. It was not Thoth who magically replaced the eye. It was Horus who finally opened it. He stopped seeing with only the right eye, the solar eye of Ra, which perceived the world of form, light, and order. He allowed the left eye, the lunar eye of Anshi, to open within him, the eye that perceived the world of shadow, potential, and the formless abyss. For the first time, he saw reality with whole sight, with unified perception. He understood that light and dark were not at war, but were locked in a divine, creative dance. He understood that true power was not in choosing one over the other, but in holding the tension of both within oneself. This was the ultimate initiation, and in that moment, the war ended. Anshi was not destroyed. He was integrated. He was absorbed into Horus, becoming the silent, unseen source of his brother's deepest power. The shadow did not vanish. It merged with the light. Horus became something new, something more than just a solar god. He became a unified being, a true master of duality. This is the hidden key to understanding the nature of the pharaohs. The living pharaoh was not just the incarnation of Horus, the child of light. He was the incarnation of the integrated Horus. This is why the pharaoh was the lord of the two lands, not just Upper and Lower Egypt as a geographical reality, but as a cosmic metaphor. He was the lord of the land of light, the living world, and the land of darkness, the underworld, the duat. He was the only one who could walk between the worlds, who could speak to the gods of light and command the spirits of the dead. This dual authority came from the fact that he held both Horus and the shadow of Anshe within him. He wielded the power of the sun and the magic of the void. He was a complete circuit. This is why the symbols of pharaonic power are so often dualistic: the vulture and the cobra, the red crown and the white crown. They are symbols of a unified consciousness that has mastered its own internal opposition. And now the motive for the great erasure becomes chillingly clear. This truth was the highest and most secret teaching of the Egyptian mystery schools. It was knowledge reserved only for the highest initiates, for the pharaohs themselves. Why? Because it is a truth that, if understood by the masses, would dismantle the very foundation of organized religion and social control. Simple narratives of good versus evil, light versus dark, God versus devil, are powerful tools for controlling a population. They create fear, they demand obedience, and they establish a clear hierarchy with the priesthood or the state as the mediator between you and salvation. But the story of Horus and Anshe teaches something far more radical and dangerous: that there is no external devil to be feared. The shadow is within you, and your spiritual task is not to vanquish it, but to understand, accept, and integrate it. This knowledge places the key to divinity directly into your own hands. It says that godhood is not about being pure light. It is about becoming whole. A person who understands this does not need a priest to absolve them. They do not need a king to guide them. They become their own source of spiritual authority. This is the secret they buried beneath the sands. Not a monster, not a demon, but a liberating truth about the nature of the self. The story of the Forbidden Twin was not erased because it was a lie, but because it was the most profound truth of all. The story of Horus and his forgotten twin is not a relic of a dead civilization. It is not a myth to be catalogued and dismissed. It is a living map, a psycho-spiritual blueprint for the journey of every human soul that has ever walked this earth. It has been buried, yes, but it was never truly lost, because it is encoded in your own being. You too were born into this world as a creature of duality. You too have a shadow. It is the repository of every part of yourself that you were taught to disown. The anger you were told was unladylike. The vulnerability you were told was unmanly. The wild, creative impulses you were told were unrealistic. The quiet, intuitive knowing you were told was imagination. Every part of your authentic self that did not fit into the neat, clean box of social acceptability was exiled to the underworld of your psyche. And you, like Horus, were taught to be a warrior of the light, to build a persona, an identity that was acceptable, successful, and good, while waging a silent, exhausting war against the other half of your soul. Look at your own life. Look at the patterns of self-sabotage, the inexplicable anxieties, the moments of rage that seem to come from nowhere. That is not you being broken. That is your own Anshi, your own shadow self, rattling the bars of its cage, demanding to be seen. You have been taught to fear this part of yourself, to medicate it, to distract it, to suppress it. You have been told that to be spiritual is to be all love and light, to banish all negativity. But that is the lie of the priesthood of Ra, the same lie that erased the shadow twin from the temple walls. It is a philosophy that ensures you will remain forever fragmented, forever at war with yourself, and therefore forever controllable. Because a person who is at war with their own shadow is too busy fighting an internal battle to ever question the external world. True spiritual power does not come from banishing your darkness. It comes from having the courage to turn around, walk into the underworld of your own being, and face the parts of you that you have abandoned. It means sitting with your rage and asking what injustice it is trying to show you. It means feeling your grief and asking what love it is still honoring. It means facing your fear and asking what power it is trying to protect. This is the process of integration. It is the healing of your own Eye of Horus. It is the moment you stop seeing your shadow as an enemy and begin to see it as a source of profound wisdom, power, and authenticity. Your shadow holds your creativity, your power, your deepest connection to the earth and to your instincts. The light of your consciousness gives it direction and purpose. When the two are integrated, you become like the pharaohs of old, a sovereign being who can walk in both worlds, who is grounded in the earth but guided by the stars, who is both powerful and compassionate, both structured and wild. You stop living a half-life, a performance of who you think you should be, and you start living as the whole, integrated being you were always meant to be. This is not an easy path. It is often painful. To face your shadow is to face every lie you have ever told yourself, every compromise you have ever made. But it is the only path to true freedom. Anything else is just a more comfortable cage. The systems of this world, religion, politics, consumer culture, are designed to keep you at war with your shadow. They thrive on your fragmentation. They sell you endless distractions, quick fixes, and hollow promises of happiness to ensure you never have to do the real, deep work of becoming whole. But the story of Horus and Anshe is a call to rebellion, a quiet, internal rebellion against that programming. It is an invitation to stop looking for a savior outside of yourself and to start the sacred work of saving yourself by integrating yourself. Ask yourself now, what part of you have you exiled? What part of your truth have you been taught to call darkness? And are you finally ready to turn and face it, not with a sword, but with compassion? Because your shadow is not waiting to destroy you. It is waiting to be reclaimed. It is waiting to come home. And in that reunion, you will not find destruction. You will find your own resurrection. You will find the missing half of your own divine soul.